I'm speaking to you this morning for our Parsha Recap from my office in the shul. I'm the only one in the building. The voices of our children from Shas are absent. The voices of those davening in our sanctuary in Beit Midrash are absent. It's a sad time. We are inhabiting a new world, a different reality. And the lesson that I'm going to teach about this morning from our Parsha has to do with using time well, with trying as much as possible to keep to our regular rhythms and routines as much as they've been disrupted. It's so critical for our own well-being, for our own sources of meaning and purpose, to do the best we can to stay to our regular learning, our regular davening, and to try and be creative to adapt to the new realities in order to be able to retain some of our schedule. And so every Tuesday we have our Women's Torah Circle. This week we met by Zoom and we were able to learn together in a new format. Parshat Vayakel begins with an instruction from Moshe to the Jewish people about Shabbos. Vayakel Moshe gathers the people, and of course that language contrasts with Vayakahel al Aharon. In last week's Parsha, the Jewish people gathered together for negative reasons on Aaron to force the construction of the Chet HaEgel, of the Egel HaZahav, that is, the golden calf. And Moshe redeems that activity of group gathering for good in this week's Parsha with the Vayakel for the instruction of Sheshet Yamim Ta'aseh Malacha, B'yom HaShavi'i Yeh Lachem Kodesh. 6 days you shall toil and work in creative labor, and the seventh day you shall rest. The question that many of the Mefarshim raise at the beginning of our Parsha is why the repetition? The instructions for Shabbos just happened in the middle of last week's Parsha, in Parshat Ki Tisa. The reason for the repetition has a lot to do with what happens between the first and second iteration of the mitzvah of Shabbat. The instruction of constructing the Mishkan as well as the Chet HaEgel are the two narratives between these bookends of Shabbat. And those narratives are consequential. The two reasons that I will provide or share for the repetition of Shabbat, one comes from Rabbi Joshua Abraham Heschel in his book The Sabbath, and the second one comes from the Ketav HaKabbalah from Rav Yaakov Tzvi Micklenburg. Rabbi Heschel writes as follows: when history began, there was only one holiness in the world, holiness in time. When at Har Sinai, the word of Hashem was voiced, a call for holiness was proclaimed. It was only after the people had succumbed to the temptation of worshipping a thing, a golden calf, that the erection of a Mishkan of holiness in space was commanded. The sanctity of time came first in Maaseh Bereshit with the declaration of Shabbat being Kodesh. The sanctity of man, of the human person, came second with the declaration at Har Sinai of Batem Tiyu Mamlechet Kohanim Vegoy Kadosh. And the sanctity of space came last. This explanation justifies the repetition of Shabbat to say that the sanctity of time is paramount. Yes, the Jewish people required a sanctity in space through the Mishkan, but that was a concession to the limitations of human nature demonstrated through the sin of Chet HaEgel. But we are a religion not exclusively of holiness of space, of the holiness of our sanctuary, of our shul. We are first and foremost a people that sanctifies time, that uses the unique moments in front of us throughout our day and our week as opportunities to do good for ourselves and for others. This is such a critical lesson for us to internalize at this moment when we don't have the sanctity of space, we don't have our shul available to us to provide us the meaning and the purpose that we so need. We have to make good choices with how we use our time constructively in order to be able to connect to Kedusha, to connect to holiness. That's the first answer. The second answer is from the Ketav HaKabbalah, who says that there are two dimensions within Shabbos. He says that there is the Shabbat. He says there's shtei shvitot. There are two types of Shabbat. There's Shvitat Haguf and there's Shvitat Haneshama, or Shvitat Hanefesh. The first kind is the cessation of bodily labor, the holding back from all of the activities that comprise the Lamed Tet Melachot. And the commandment of Shabbat in Parsha Recap reinforces that by discussing over and over again the consequences of Chilul Shabbat, of breaking Shabbat by doing Melacha, as being death. The commandment of Shabbat in the beginning of Parshat Vayakel is less about the Isur Malacha and more about the Yom HaShvi'i, Shabbat Yihiyeh LaHashem Elokecha, that the seventh day should be sanctified for Hashem, and that is the second dimension of Shabbat, the Shvitat HaNefesh, the relaxation of the mind and the soul. Whereas the first type of Shabbat is we accomplish by passively not doing certain things. The second kind of Shabbat is the kind of Shabbat that we do proactively. And this is such a critical lesson as well for us to internalize at this moment in time when we are unable to partake in some of the rhythms of life that give us meaning and purpose. We need to try in our own homes and specifically over Shabbat to be engaged in the activities that provide the Kedusha, that provide the Shvitat HaNefesh, that nourish our souls. Whether that is singing around the Shabbat table, playing some fun board games that connect us to each other, reading through the Parsha, reading books that are uplifting and inspiring to us. During the week, learning in online forums and online shiurim. These are the kinds of ways that we can pivot in order to be able to retain the second dimension of Shabbat, the second dimension of holiness and time. I bless us all that these measures should be temporary and that we are be able to regain our sources of meaning in our life by that being in-person connection to each other through our shul, and that should come soon. But in the meantime, we should be able to successfully transition and adjust to this new reality by using the opportunities available to us and maximizing Kedushat Hazman in that time. I look forward to staying in touch in the days ahead. Be well.